I'd like to call this study session of Lakewood City Council for Monday, September 13th to order. The first item for discussion is a review of the second quarter financial report. John's not even here. John, Mr. Caulfield.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council members. This is the Quarter 2 financial report. I just have a few items I'd like to highlight in this report, and I'm going to share my screen. So in this report, on the first page, you'll see where I added some additional information. This is in accordance with the city's financial policies as it relates to financial reporting. So I've added a table for criminal justice, sales tax, additional information for seizure funds, combine the public works engineering with community development permits and fees, so you get the whole picture for development services. I've added the specific projects that will be funded by 1406 Affordable Housing Program. I've also added the farmers market metrics, including financials, and provided additional details on property management as well as information technology fund. For the next quarter's report, I will add the Arpa funds. The second thing I'd like to highlight is on the ending fund balance for the general and street fund. And you can see from this table here that for quarter end June of this year, we've had the highest ending fund balance we've had since 2007. In 2011, we had the lowest ending fund balance of 1.6 million. And as the second quarter, we have $13.7 million. And I want to also point out that this does not include this over $6 million that we received in ARPA funds. We received those funds in August, so you'll see that in the third quarter report. And also with this high ending fund balance, you'll see next month I'll be taking the mid-biennium budget adjustment to you for review. And that's where you'll see some opportunities for capital projects and other one-time funds using the ending fund balance from the general fund. And this here is the table of our general and street fund revenues and expenditures and ending fund balance. So revenues overall are up compared to 2020 by $3.1 million or 16%. And compared to budget, year-to-date budget, it's up by 3.8 million or 19%. We have a lot of areas that are increasing compared to 2020. And the biggest ones are sales tax, which is up by 1.7 million, gambling tax by over $1 million. And then we also have some minor, less substantial increases in development services up by 296,000, and property tax by 160,000, criminal justice sales tax by $136,000, and park sales tax consistent with criminal justice and regular sales tax is up by 75,000. Our state shared revenues is also up, and we're seeing increases year to date in fuel tax just in the general and street fund by $43,000, and liquor revenues and excise tax of 16,000. Camera infractions are also up by $35,000, and parks and recreation fees are also up by 27,000. On the revenues that are down, admissions tax is down by $17,000. Extra duty contracts is down by 179,000, but that also has expenditure savings of the same amount. Intergovernmental revenues are down by $128,000, and that's primarily to the court contracts. Fines and forfeitures are down by $57,000, and miscellaneous revenue is down by $34,000, and that's primarily in interest earnings. Overall, expenditures compared to 2020 increased minimally by 88,000 or 0.5%. Cost recovery for development services, the target policy per the policy is 85%, and a year to date it's 175%. Where we averaged for the last 5 years is 88%. For parks, the policy target recovery is 45%, and year to date, it's 50%. And looking over a period of 2016 to 2020, the average cost recovery was 45%. As you've seen in the city manager's updates, our real estate excise tax and transportation benefit district have also increased. Just to give you an update for where we are through year-to-date August, we're up by 689,000 compared to year-to-date August 2020. And compared to the annual estimate of 1,800,000, we've already collected 1,100,000 I'm sorry. Compared to year-to-date August, we're up by almost 1.2 million. Transportation benefit district revenues compared to August of 2020, we're up by 33,000, and compared to year-to-date budget estimate is up by $50,000. So those are really the 7 highlights that I wanted to bring up for this quarter's report. And that concludes my presentation.
Any questions for Ms. Kraus? Mr. Whalen.
Thank you, Tom, on the report. I had a question on the property tax because we try to increase no more than 1%, right? On an annual basis?
Yes, that's correct.
We're doing a little bit better than that. Is that cause for us to reconsider when we do those emergency authorizations to get to the 1% in the following biennium if we continue at this rate?
So this is limited at 1%. So a lot of it will be timing difference as well. So at the year end, the city cannot collect more than what is authorized in the ordinance.
Okay.
So no, there is nothing that needs to be different if the city council wants to continue collecting 1%.
That's part of it, right? Okay, got it.
Mr.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you very much, Ta. The fund balance at the end of, but it's middle of the year, is very strong compared to last year. Do you have an estimate that where you think you're going to end up the year, or are you going to wait until you talk about the mid-biennial adjustments to?
I will wait to talk about the mid-biennium budget adjustment. As I mentioned, this ending fund balance. Well, first of all, I should say we're in a very good spot through June. However, with this new Delta variant that's coming about, it's really hard to predict what it's going to look like at year end. Things, the revenues have come up more than we anticipated in 2020. It's coming in stronger than we anticipated for 2021. But just like anything else, easy come, easy go. So, I'll have some type of estimate, but that could change very, very quickly. But if things were to stick, this provides for great opportunities for capital projects and other one-time programs that we haven't had the opportunity to implement before.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Brandstetter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Kraus, how much of the fund balance that we have is attributed to the fact that we sold bonds for capital projects for transportation?
Because the ending fund balance that I'm presenting in this chart is it is just for the general and street fund. The bonds do not have an impact whatsoever. The bonds that we issued are deposited into the capital projects funds, and we track them there, the expenditures and such, so they are not reflected in this ending fund balance at all.
So how does how much of those funds that we've garnered from the sale of bonds are we on track to spend between now and the end of the biennium?
So in terms of the bonds that we've already issued, we have spent those bond proceeds for the transportation projects. The new bonds that we are issuing coming up early October is $6.6 million for the remaining transportation bonds that the City Council approved in the last biennium. So those expenditures, those bond proceeds, we're allowed to go back and capture the cost to offset the bond proceeds going back to, it was at the very beginning of can't remember what year we're in, of 2019, I believe. And so those bond proceeds should be spent fairly quickly as well. We're also getting ready to issue the bonds for the storm drainage swim fund of $4 million to pay for the element that's related to storm drainage in those bond projects. But again, there are two separate funding sources. The bond transportations for bond transportation projects is funded with real estate excise tax. And the portion that is funded by the swim fund is coming out of the swim fund. So no general fund impact at this point.
So, I mean, let me be sure that I understand. As we sell bonds and we have bond proceeds, we can go back and look at previous expenses that we spent other types of money for, reimburse ourselves, and then recoup those other funds back into the general fund?
Okay, so maybe this is getting a little bit more detailed. So when we issue bonds, those bond proceeds go into the Transportation Capital Project Fund. I was responding to whether we had spent those. The bond proceeds stay in the Capital Projects Fund, and we can offset those bond proceeds with the expenditures that we had incurred going back to 2019. So that my first response was to show that we've accounted for the bonds and the expenditures as they relate to the projects that the City Council had authorized. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The impact to the general fund, there is no impact to the general fund because when the City Council approved those bonds, the City Council approved real estate excise tax as the fund that would pay for the debt service. For the $4 million that is being issued out of the swim fund, the City Council approved the bond ordinance to have that portion be paid out of the swim fund. So the two funds that are impacted are Transportation Fund and Swim Fund. The ending fund balance that I'm showing here on page 6 of the packet is just for the general and street fund.
Okay, let me just ask one clarifying question. So we have a project that we've approved as a council could be paid for with bond proceed dollars. And when we originally did the early part of the project, before those dollars were available, we used REIT funds, perhaps. We'll credit the bond proceeds against that expenditure, but the REIT dollars then just get set aside and eventually get used to pay debt service.
Okay, I'll try to clarify this the best that I can. There is a timing difference between project expenditures and bond proceeds coming into the fund. At the end of the year, as long as the fund is made whole and the fund is in a positive ending fund balance, we're good. So we waited to issue the bonds late last year to see how the COVID impact would be. This year, we're doing the same thing. We held off and now we're issuing those bonds. And come year end, so what the council did was approve projects, expenditures, as well as the funding source. It's just a matter of timing when we get the bond proceeds and the other revenue sources, such as real estate excise tax. The real estate excise tax that was scheduled to be paid for debt service in 2021 will likely be a smaller amount in 2021 because we didn't issue the bonds early on. So we'll pay for some of the interest, but not all of it. In 2022, we will have the full debt service accounted for to come out of the real estate excise tax, and we've already budgeted for that.
That's fine. I'll think about that, and maybe if I can phrase an intelligent question in email, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Another way to look at it is, we as the council authorized the opening of a credit card account. We intended it to use it to build roads. We started building the roads. And when the bills came due, we shuffled a little money around, and then we drew against the credit card later because there was a special where we got a better interest rate. Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Todd, I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, but I will. And I'll defer if there, you'll get back to us. But I'm on page 76, and maybe I'm looking on the Fund 302 Transportation CIP. And we have a budget of 21.8 million, and we've got expenditures of 26.2 million. To date, 4.4 million has been spent. And then it says, but the Gravelly Lake Drive, Washington Boulevard to Nyanza non-motorized trail, and there's no budget, and year-to-date expenditures were $38,000. So I'm not seeing something, or is it in another fund? Because that's our biggest item, right? This year.
Right. And to be honest, I'm working on the mid-biennium budget adjustment. I have been working on that, and I've gotten through most of the departments, and I saved Public Works last intentionally because theirs has been the bigger dollars and the more complicated one. So my goal was tomorrow, when I'm back in the office, is to start the Public Works piece of it. But what you'll see is, I think this is one of the bigger projects. And I'm going to guess that there's going to be a budget adjustment for it.
Okay. And then I'm glad to see that the LED lights are still going in on that line.
And Councilmember Boke, I will say that sometimes we have timing differences. If there's a project that is budgeted in 2022, and there is some, and I'm not sure that this is the answer for it, but sometimes there's preliminary work that's being done. It'll get charged before the project is budgeted. But because the city council budgeted on a project length budget for the biennium, it's very likely that there could be some expenditures, a small amount that could occur in the year prior to the start.
Thank you. And what kind of fund balance are we looking at in the REIT now that the REIT is coming in so strong?
I think there's one box.
I don't know.
Well, I had budgeted $1.8 million, and I am just, if I could just pull up a table.
Then we paid this one box.
I don't know what fund number it is, but it's on page 66, 68, depending on what.
Okay, so right now, our budget is $1.8 million, and through August, we've collected $2,179,000. So we've already exceeded what we had budgeted. So looking at, so we know we still have 4 more months to go, and we're already $380,000 above that. In terms of what is in the fund, let me go back. Just give me 1 second to pull up Fund 102.
Okay.
So
What page are you on now?
I am on page 94.
Yeah, let me get there.
And the revised budget shows that there is $1.8 million in the fund if we collected $1.8 million. But we know that we've already exceeded by about 380,000. So we have a good portion that is going to be available. One thing that you will see in the mid-biennium budget adjustment is the introduction of an opportunity fund. And so one thing that the city manager has been wanting to do, or has given me direction to do, is create an opportunity fund where we can take the excess real estate excise tax and general fund or any other funds and set it aside for capital projects or economic development opportunity. So what you'll see in the mid-biennium adjustment is a portion of this real estate excise tax, as well as some of the general fund proposed to be moved over into this opportunity fund.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No more weeds to pull. Anything further, Ms. Kraus?
That is all. I'm scheduled to present the mid-biennium budget adjustment to the City Council at the October 11th study session. So some of those answers, specifically the Project 77, should be addressed at that point, if not sooner.
Well, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
See you then. We now move to a review of policies and priorities for allocation of the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA funds. And for this, we have Ms. Spear. And then what I intend to do is kind of walk through the individual items for discussion by council.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Tiffany Spear, Long Range and Strategic Planning Manager. With me this evening, also online tonight, is Ted Thielen, the graduate intern that's been assisting with the ARPA community engagement in particular, but now administration of the program as well as it stands. So I'll walk through the presentation, which is included in your packet. Your memo begins on page 126. Beginning on page 141 of the packet is a summary of all of the community engagement responses we received about potential third-party expenditures. And then beginning on page 217 of the packet is the PowerPoint. There are several changes to the PowerPoint since the City Council's packet was put together, just because this is such a liquid, fungible topic. Things are changing every day. So there's a few things that have been updated for tonight. So to begin, just a quick summary that there was the public hearing last Tuesday, the 7th. And the week prior to that, or 2 weeks prior to that, there was the initial study session on August 23rd. Where we are tonight is a review of the public comments as the council desires, going through a summary review of the program, looking at how the current proposed ordinance reads in terms of policies and initial allocations of funds and potential initial expenditures, and then seeing if there's any other direction the council would like to give tonight to staff regarding next steps. So the way the recommendations for tonight can be summarized is, first of all, recommending that the council does adopt the ordinance with or without amendment. Within the ordinance, there is 3 pieces. There's the policies and priorities of use for the funds. There's setting aside a percentage of the total of funds into each of the 7 categories, which have been created by the Department of the Treasury in terms of tracking and reporting how the dollars are going to be spent. And then also there is an initial recommended list of expenditures, which are really time sensitive, as opposed to some of the other discussions of either third party or internal to the city expenditures between now and the end of the ARPA program in 2026. But there's 3 other pieces. One is to talk about the ideas raised for the use of city revenue replacement or lost revenue. Also, the council providing direction over whether to hold any of the funds until the idea of collaboration with Pierce County and or other local government and or other organizations have been fully fleshed out. And fourth, if the City Council wants to provide any directions right now regarding any of the suggested external expenditures that have come in to date and have been provided to the council in tonight's packet. So the September 7th public hearing, just very quickly, there were a number of people who testified in person or with written comment. You had Kim Taylor from the Rebuilding Together South Sound echoing their request for $325,000 for a 5-year program within the city. Mr. Gauthier from Habitat for Humanity, $242,000 infrastructure investment into the Boat Street Affordable Housing Project. Randall Black from Lakewood Water District talking about the hope that the district would be able to use funds for the new St. Clair Hospital well, rather than the one that had been identified by staff, which was the Ponders Corner well or Ponders Creek. Jan Hutchins from LASA requesting support for new housing capacity within the city at a location adjacent to their offices. Jesse Black from Springbrook Connections requesting that the city consider partnering with Pierce County and others that they're in communications with to help purchase the Center First building for use as a community center for Springbrook, Tillicum, and Woodbrook. Ms. Donna Panapinto from United Way regarding the Center for Strong Families program, a 3-year period of time totaling $150,000. And then you had Doctors Tim and Deb Willem from the Clover Park Veterinary Hospital submitting comment talking about the need to address homelessness issues by the city in order to help support the business districts. So just a little bit of information about the groundwater well that the Lakewood Water District wanted to have considered by City Council rather than the Ponders well. This is more expensive. This is approximately a $1.5 million project versus the $1 million in Ponders. But this serves a number of different purposes, all of which I think are supported by ARPA. It is increasing water availability for new businesses, expansions at the hospital, so public health support, additional water source for city customers. It is during a national disaster, something that the hospital would use as a direct water source. It is long-term benefit, obviously, to the city to have a new well established. And this is also something that could be the result of multiple partners on the funding side. There were a couple of questions asked during the discussion on September 7th, several from Councilmember Ranstetter and one from Councilmember Farmer. Whether, first of all, any commercial landlords had provided feedback in the community engagement process. We weren't able to verify that 100% based on how the survey questions were asked or answered. But looking at the language and what was requested by the landlord respondents, most of them, if not all of them, were residential landlords. And then just the more general question of whether commercial landlord assistance is available per ARPA, doing a research online through cities, county, state, and federal resources, we were not able to find anything that's specifically relief for commercial landlords. And then Councilmember Farmer asked about the application deadline for the first round or first cohort within the BIPOC Business Accelerator being run by the county. And that was changed from September 10th through September 17th. So it's actually this coming Friday is the deadline for that application.
So one question on that, just for clarification.
Sure.
You didn't, on the commercial landlord assistance, you didn't find any specific allocation, but isn't it correct? You did, it's allowed as a negative economic impact of COVID that can be addressed?
Yes, it's something that the city could handle that way. And if the commercial landlords were able to find at the other governmental levels that type of an application for a general business assistance, they may well be able to qualify there.
Thank you.
So this is just a graphic representation of a chronology here. The way ARPA is set up, people, businesses, households are able to try to receive relief for expenses incurred prior to March 3rd of 2021. However, the city itself cannot be incurring costs prior to March 3rd and trying to get that reimbursed through ARPA. So the March 3rd is the magic date where the city would say, this is the first date where we are able to start incurring costs as a jurisdiction, but it is possible after March 3rd to be receiving applications for support from subrecipients or individual businesses for costs incurred prior to that date. Hopefully that made sense. The city has between March 3rd of this year and December 31st of 2024 to incur or identify how the ARPA dollars it is receiving will be spent. And then, of course, the deadline to fully exhaust the funds is December 31st of 2026. A couple of updates regarding the collaborations that have been discussed to date with the council. First of all, Pierce County has now hired a person named Brian Sibley to facilitate cooperation among the jurisdictions and the county. I have yet to hear from him. I don't know if he's reached out to the mayor or anyone else yet, but he was just announced as a new person this last week, actually by Councilmember Boki in his position at the county. So once he is in place, has his feet on the ground, I'm assuming he will be reaching out. And then as part of the county's biennial budget, which will be released September 21st, and final decision will be made by November 23rd, ARPA expenditures will be a large part of what's discussed. So with the fact that this new person is now on staff with the county and the timeline for budget negotiations at the county level, the collaborative discussion with various jurisdictions to maximize use of ARPA dollars as a group presumably will be coming up again here in the near future. The Comfort Inn purchase in partnership with City of Tacoma and Pierce County is underway. The escrow is open, but the closing date is still to be determined. As we just were talking about, the BIPOC Business Accelerator program is now accepting applications. The intent is to have between now and May of 2022, 8 different cohorts of, I want to say about 25 businesses each. So about 200 businesses being served through the program by next May. And it is intended that this would be a multi-year program. No additional information yet regarding whether the county is going to be successful in partnering with the Small Business Administration to serve as the business navigator through that administration. But even if it doesn't, the intent here at this point, at least, is for Lakewood to maybe partner with the county in terms of business navigation services going forward. We do not know yet if any new information regarding potential partners for infrastructure spending with the state. I know that's something that the AWC is pursuing. And so we'll see if that comes to fruition over this next legislative session or beyond. And then the SHAPE group has not yet circulated any sort of request for use of ARPA dollars. However, the first SHAPE executive board meeting is scheduled for September 29th, where it will be shifting from the current somewhat informal executive or steering committee to turning into the more formal organization underneath the intergovernmental agreement that City of Lakewood has already committed to. So it may be coming after September 29th, a new discussion about this and an outreach to various jurisdictions to support some sort of coordinated expenditure toward housing. So the way the ordinance and the information that's been provided to council to date recommends dollars be allocated among the 7 categories established by the Department of Treasury, is that a little under 1% would go toward public health. About 27% would be set aside for negative economic impacts and the associated administrative costs. 29% for disproportionately impacted communities. No set aside for premium pay. Almost 11% for infrastructure, almost 28% for the lost revenue or revenue replacement, and then 5% for general indirect administrative costs for the city. So you'll see that same information here in graphic form. All of these numbers, I should say, and all of the numbers throughout this presentation actually, and in the ordinance, are preliminary and are subject to change. So this graph here, I'll spend a little bit of time on.
Question.
Oh, sure.
Could you back up one graph? This graph in the draft ordinance shows up in Exhibit B. And the recommended ARPA share in dollars, we stuck every dollar in A through G. And is it possible in the ordinance to create a line H that is more of a reserve to be determined, but without putting those dollars in one of the other 7. And, you know, I am of the view that there's still things out there that we are evaluating what is the best use of these dollars. And while I guess that I'd rather in the ordinance say, we know how we're going to spend 9 million. But that, 4.7 million, and those are just numbers, we're still evaluating options of how to spend that to be able to go through and do that.
Councilman
And I'd rather-
Branster, I think that's a question for us as opposed to for Ms. Spear. And so the way I mentioned in passing, but the way I tended to guide the discussion is take the presentation, the questions, and then run through the items and have a discussion on the items by council to see to what extent there's a common consensus on them. And then we see how much money we would spend on the ones that we have a common consensus on, whether we have to go pare back from that. And then we talk about time, which is directly addresses your issue there, whether we want to spend, how much we want to spend now, when we want to wait, whether we want to reserve.
Okay, so you would see that in a final ordinance, we might have other numbers in this table that doesn't include all 13
I could see an
million.
ordinance that spends $9 million, for example. I mean,
All right, thank you.
it's what we want to do. Ms. Bear, back to you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, this is not intended to say that all of these dollars would be spent now. This is just showing that there are 7 categories suggested by Department of Treasury within which to spend your funds. Absolutely, these numbers can change and be amended as desired by the council. And yes, you could add another or multiple other rows if you wish, but these are the 7 that are identified within Treasury as recommended for ways to track and report back to them over time. So what I have done with this next table is try to clarify how the dollars, assuming that graphic, which is now reflected in this first column, totaling the total amount of ARPA funds the city has gotten, compares to the amount of funds that would be required for all of the applied or suggested expenditures. None of which there's been any commitment to for third parties, by the way. So I'll just walk through this, but please, if it gets confusing or if there's questions, let me know. So again, these are the 7 categories that the Department of Treasury has created and suggested. The amount within that is what was just discussed last. And really, the only thing here, there are 2, F and G. F is this number that is the preliminary lost revenue as determined per the Treasury math equation by Ms. Kraus. And then the general administrative costs, the limit within ARPA is 10% total of the ARPA dollars could be put toward administration. Then within Treasury's guidance, they say that for all of the various specific expenditures, the direct administrative costs for those expenditures should be in that category. So what I've done here is say half of it would be used for the more general indirect costs, and then the rest of it is 5% for each one of these categories for those specific expenditures that may happen within them. So including the initial expenditures, taking those down through each of the categories that are really, again, the time sensitive ones, which are included in the proposed ordinance, you end up with a total of about $5,560,000 on the initial expenditures. Subtracting the second from the first, you end up with about $8,200,000, and then this is identifying which one of those 7 categories the funds remain in. Then you jump to the amount of funds that was requested when we reached out through the community engagement process to stakeholders, organizations, individuals, businesses, etc. And this shows where their applications would fall, and then the total number there. If you take what's left after the initial expenditures and subtract the amount that would be needed for 100% of those external requests, and you see it's about $3 million more than what was allocated to the city. Then you look at, there was a list of items that were identified internally by the city for use of lost revenue, which was just over $2 million. So when you add what was requested in the city to the total that would be remaining after the external, and you see we're about 5.175 million over the total amount provided to the city. All of this does not include potential collaboration. So again, going back to what was just said a few moments ago, we just now have learned that there's a new staff person at the county that's going to be the lead to reach out to jurisdictions about collaborating with funds. We haven't heard from SHAPE yet. There may be other things with other efforts coming forward that we just aren't aware of yet. So going to those initial expenditures, and again, they total about 5.56 million. 4 of them, which are shaded here on this chart, are ones that the council has already talked about. First is the purchase of the Comfort Inn. Secondly is the allocation to the CSAB for use and allocation in the years 22 and 23. Third is the Warriors of Change program with Clover Park High School. And fourth is the purchase of the police body cameras, and then 5 years of program operation. The rest of these are the vaccination incentives, which have been encouraged by Treasury and President Biden. The second is funding the ability for Tacoma Pro Bono to represent tenants within the city of Lakewood for eviction defense and prevention. As you know, the eviction moratorium ends on September 30th, so this is a very time sensitive issue for people within the city of Lakewood. Third item would be supporting the Business Accelerator program at least for 1 year, and this is the $525,000, which is including the administrative costs. Fourth is the Lakewood Police Department retention bonus of $7,500 per officer, with a maximum, if every single one were to take it, of $637,500. And then the final is the 5% of the indirect administrative cost for the city. So setting that aside. So all of those together, again, 5.56 million. Stepping back into what was received kind of informally through the community engagement process and broken out by which category they would fall into, you see a number of external requests, which total the 11.63 million. You'll see down here in shade, again, these are areas where we don't have a number yet. The Business Navigator program, whether the Cohen Clinic for Veteran Services would actually be requesting any funds. I did reach out to them and had initial conversations, but they never submitted a suggested idea. Collaboration with county and cities, SHAPE, and then again, if we were wanting to support Tacoma Pro Bono within the city of Lakewood beyond the first year. But otherwise, all of these were discussed in August 23rd's packet, tonight's packet, and some of these people were part of the public testimony on September 7th. Within the city, there were a number of items identified for use of the revenue replacement or the lost revenue funds. First two here are partnerships with outside groups, so West Pierce Fire and Rescue, University Place in Steilacoom, the Emergency Services Alert and Warning System. West Pierce Fire and Rescue, the support of a South Sound Alliance report looking at the future of labor in the South Sound, redesigning and allowing for multilingual services through the city's website, providing hand washing facilities at those parks without bathrooms, looking at the design and reorganization of City Hall space to just the first and second floor for city operations, improving the social distancing availability within the city council chambers, especially on the dais, upgrading court chambers for hybrid proceedings, looking at human resources technology to handle a hybrid workplace going forward. So it's the initial purchase of this software and then 3 years of operation. The youth employment program that the city council expressed interest in as far back as this March. This would be a 3-year program through the Parks and Recreation Department. So $84,000 per year for each of those 3 years. City reader boards as a way for people to be able to remotely see what's going on, upcoming announcements and such from the city. If you'll recall, former communications director Bryn, I always forget her last name. I'm sorry, provided information to the city council, and her estimation from last year was that it would be about $160,000 for each one of those boards, and also provided proposed locations for them. And that's also included again in your packet this evening. And then finally, the cooler system replacement at the city hall with bipolar ionization. So all of these things together total a little over 2 million.
Okay, so why, other than for information and a staff suggestion as to how we should spend the replacement of lost revenue, is there any need from a legal standpoint or guidance from Treasury to have projects identified other than say we reserve $2 million for paying ourselves $2 million for lost revenue?
No, none of these projects are needing to be identified or approved. And the way the city could do the allocation of its lost revenue is to say, as you say, Mr. Mayor, this much dollars will be spent for. There are some lists within Treasury of the types of categories where it's okay to use the funds, but they're pretty broad. And I can do some follow-up with some more explanation about that. It does not have to be use of the funds specifically for COVID-19 related expenditures.
So I'd like to get, I think council would appreciate if we could find out what the broadest parameters on that are, as far as saying, identify lost revenue, how much is it? It can't go quote unquote to reserves, but it doesn't seem to have any, I haven't seen a no supplanting language.
If you're,
There's-
I'm sorry, if you're asking for a specific legal opinion on that, I think Ms. Spear, from what I've seen on the one session that I attended at ICMA or WCMA, seemed to be ahead of where some other jurisdictions are. And it's been pointed out to us that we've got US Treasury providing some guidance at the same time will ultimately be audited by the state. There's not a necessarily a safe harbor. And as I said, I believe Ms. Spear appeared to be as knowledgeable as anyone in the room when I saw this being considered at the conference.
There should be Treasury guidance this week and certainly this month. My concern is that we tie ourselves down with our ordinances to specific items that may or may not be council priorities in a normal budget cycle, and when we don't have to. If we can be, the broader the better, I guess.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah. Ms. Farmer.
So I'm feeling dense tonight. So is what you're suggesting mean that we would not tie ourselves to these items? We couldn't suggest other items or ask questions of these? We would leave it up to the discretion, or?
No, it would be a council budget decision as to how to spend money.
I understand. Thank you.
But it doesn't, we don't want to tie our hands at this point if we don't have to, because they're general as opposed to COVID impact related when it's revenue replacement. And the restrictions are changing daily, or at least in our case right now, weekly, because they're going to be new Treasury guidance. So see what they say and keep it as broad as possible. Back to Mr. Whalen.
Well, maybe in lieu of me asking a question right now, we'll get to the maybe orderly process to go through some of these items, and then we can ask questions at the time. But my particular question when we get to it is about the Comfort Inn purchase. So
That was first on my agenda items for walking through. So
well, then, if I may ask the question, so we have all expressed support that this is a worthy expenditure because it leverages funds with the county and with the city of Tacoma. My concern with rushing to fund Lakewood's portion without having some sort of interlocal agreement in place before closing just makes me a little concerned about ensuring that Lakewood has its seat at the table, so to speak, with regard to the beds that we will be allocated for our investment dollars, and a process by which we can be comfortable that folks that are referred there for housing and services will get the services that they need. So what's kind of percolating in that regard? Is anybody doing an interlocal agreement on how this whole project is going to work in terms of the beds allocated to the jurisdictions funding the purchase, and what can we expect by way of services for the folks referred there?
Deputy Mayor, if that question is directed to me, the answer is yes. It's not completed yet. And part of what's going on is the city of Tacoma, Pierce County, and Lakewood are waiting on Lehigh to do some of the background work. It's taking longer than desired for sure. But between now and next Monday, I will get as much information as I can and provide it to the city manager to provide to the council.
Thank you. I think more than a interlocal, it's going to be the conditions on the grant to Lehigh.
Who's Lehigh again?
So, Low Income Housing Institute. They have hundreds and hundreds of units, mostly in King County.
And they're going to be the operator?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Mr. Branstad.
you know, on that particular expenditure, I'm supportive of going ahead with the 1 year, 1 million towards capital costs. I do that because it buys Lakewood 2 years that would operate as a shelter, which is a critical need that we have got to get addressed, and that the public both wants addressed, plus there are some legal issues of not having a shelter restricts us in other ways. But I also recognize that after 2 years, the benefit to the city decreases significantly because Lehigh is not really in the shelter business. They're in they're in the housing business, and they're really going to spend that 2 years while they'll operate the shelter because they're going to get the ownership of a building and transform it into housing under their business model. They are able to then be self-sustaining, but it'll be housing in Tacoma. It won't be transitional housing in Lakewood. You know, there is, but there is some short-term value to Lakewood that is, you know, an important need. And so I'm supportive of that 1 million, but not going or even giving too much of an indication that we're ready to go into beyond that, to be able to go and do that, because it's Tacoma particularly that's going to get the long-term value from the project. And they're the ones that need to be doing operating costs and subsidizing Lehigh if Lehigh needs to be subsidized in the long term.
Well, that raises a good question. So what is the benefit to Lakewood post 2 years? Because you think about $1 million and we're down the road on this thing. But I'm working with a client who's got a motel in Kitsap County, and the Kitsap County folks are paying basically $1,800 a month for housing of the homeless per room. So you think about how many we could house for $1 million at $1,800 a month on average. We could do a hell of a lot with $1 million without throwing it down the tubes for a 2-year run.
That's not that much.
Oh, I know, but it would be nice to have something beyond 2 years, I guess. And
Well,
maybe we will.
There's two things that you think of. One, it's going to be very difficult for them to pull off the fund and pull off the transition they're talking about in a 2-year period. So it's likely to be a longer period before there's conversion. And when there is conversion, it's going to provide transitional housing, workforce housing, whatever it is, just as readily to Lakewood folks as it is to Tacoma. It's on that, you know, the functional, you know, it's kind of the Bermuda Triangle of jurisdictions there, where people wander back between Lakewood and Tacoma and unincorporated Pierce County and do bad stuff. So it probably is going to be good for the neighborhood because of the security involved with it. And that's going to help us because we're right under the underpass there. And so I think it has more long-term benefit than you might think. It's still going to eliminate the single person shelter that is missing in the piece, but we get a reprieve in that regard. And at 1,800 a month, 33, you're getting a few people really. So if we just work through this a little bit, what I'd like to do is walk down. We've kind of taken.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry, would you mind if I go through just a few more slides and then be out of your hair?
Okay.
Okay,
And then stand by because we'll have questions. Sorry.
Yes, yes. All right, thank you. I'll finish up here really quickly. So again, all of these suggested uses are simply that. They are there as ideas for the council to consider. There's been no commitment by anybody on the internal or the external ideas that are presented to you. So once the council takes action regarding how to spend the funds, the city will move ahead with hiring needed staff to administer. We've got half of the tranche, or the first tranche in. We do not have the second tranche until mid-August, but depending on how the council decides to spend the money, that can be worked through. For instance, multiple year distributions wouldn't all happen at once, so we would just be able to figure out how to spend the dollars in a timely way. The most time sensitive issues, as I mentioned at the very beginning, September 30th of this year ends the eviction and utility payment moratoriums. This is reflected in what you see by recommending expenditure for Tacoma Pro Bono services. The purchase of the Comfort Inn as an emergency shelter and the hiring of staff. Related to Comfort Inn, just very quickly, the intention at this point is 2 years of an emergency shelter and then conversion to permanent supportive housing. So it is not going to be rapid rehousing or workforce housing. It's intended to be 0 to 30% permanent supportive housing once it's no longer an emergency shelter. According to Attorney General, it is okay, although normally maybe not. It is okay to be spending these dollars for third-party organizations. We simply have to be tracking how those funds are spent, and that's echoed in Arpa itself. So you'll obviously be doing this right now, but there's some options just to consider. There could be no action at all taken now. You have until the end of 24 to decide how to obligate funds. You could be talking policy priority and how to put dollars into buckets without actually expending anything. Or you could do some list of expenditures, be it the ones provided to you or different ones. Or you could set aside all the money now. As I mentioned, everything exceeds what the available dollars are. So these are the 4 items. Again, I think the mayor's ready to walk you through each one of these, but these questions for you this evening. And then depending on how your discussions go, I guess the decision will be whether the council's ready to take action on the 20th. And then I think that is all I will do. I will sit here and answer questions as needed.
Thank you. My iPad keeps going back to content. So we have bounced around here on the Comfort Inn. And what I like to do is kind of get a consensus as to projects that the council generally is favorable toward, and then look at timing. You know, one timing auction could be do nothing now. There's some now, some later, a few now, a lot later, wait till November. So there are a lot of timing issues, how you divide the pie up. But the first thing is, I think maybe when we go through there, we'll see some that council generally isn't too hot on, and we can either eliminate them or put them in Either go to the discard file or the whole pile.
Which list are you looking at there?
So I was worked through that first list, which is page 130. Starting with the Comfort Inn, that's the one we've kicked around. These are city expenditure, well, excuse me. First one, second, there are some city expenditures in here, but page 130 of the 130. Recommended initial ARPA expenditures starts with Comfort Inn. Does everybody have that? Okay, so we'll start with the Comfort Inn. And we've discussed the pros and cons of that, keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And what I would just do is note proviso. We want condition approved. We want some insurance in the agreement, whether it's an interlocal or the contract with Lehigh, that we're going to have the access that's expected. The next one is Lakewood Community Services. I think everybody was favorable on this before,
Right.
putting some more money in the 1% pot. So that's a yes. Warriors of Change, Clover Park.
That's water under the bridge. Yeah.
The horses out of the barn there. So it's what pot we pay it out of. The Pierce County BIPOC Business Accelerator. Pardon? Oh, I was looking at a different list. The body cameras. I guess the question isn't whether we purchase them, it's what we can or want to do with respect to ARPA funding on that. And there are three options, really. You pay it out of general fund revenue, you pay it out of ARPA, or you split it capital to start up for general fund or ARPA and then pay it out of general fund revenue going forward.
That's probably something we don't have to decide tonight. I think we've already passed the ordinance for the city to buy it. It's a question of whether we're going to use revenue replacement.
So the question then would be, do we take that, use ARPA money for the initial capital expenditure and include that in an ordinance, or do we just wait?
The initial capital expenditure, that seems to be a solid, good use of ARPA dollars. I'm less certain about using ARPA dollars to pay for staff who are really going to be permanent, and or putting money into the replacement fund for the eventual replacement longer term. I think those are expenses that we have but I'm not sure that they make good ARPA sense. However, I'm also willing to give the city manager some wherewithal, because I view all of the revenue replacement money really going into him and staff to be able to coming back through the budgeting processes that we have, because we have lots of other restricted type funds that go into our annual budget, like REIT dollars and others. To allow him to manage that, I just maybe right now we just need to commit for the capital, and maybe the first year or partial year for those employees to onboard them through the end of this biennium. And then in the next biennial budget, take a look at whether remaining ARPA revenue replacement funds are the best way to do that in the 23-24 biennium or not. or if it should come from someplace else.
Mr. Volkey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm for the 900,000 being used. I'm actually for the revenue replacement, the almost 3.8 million going into the back into where it needs to go in revenue replacement and using the $900,000. As Councilmember Brandon said, for ARPA eligibility. After that, the remaining about 2.9 million, I think we should hold it until we've decided what we want to do under what kind of programs and that kind of thing. The two public records people are now general government people, and they need to come out of the police department, and we need to have a discussion about what salary savings are left in there, and when we do the biennial adjustments, look at hiring those people in, I guess they'll be hired sometime next year. So I'm in agreement with that. It's not a good idea to hire permanent people with ARPA dollars, so that's where I'd leave it. But above that, I'm also saying I'm okay with the $3.8 million going in for revenue replacement.
Just
Mr.
a
Whalen?
question of clarification on the body cam acquisition costs. This may be for Mr. Caulfield. When this came up and we adopted the ordinance, I was of the impression from the chief that it was possible that the capital acquisition monies could come from a state grant, which is independent from the ARPA funds. So if we were to use ARPA funds through the revenue replacement, would that then obviate our ability to seek the state grant for the same acquisition cost?
Deputy Mayor Whalen, we're not aware of any state monies becoming available for body cameras, though AWC is putting forth as part of their legislative agenda that the state provide funding for body cameras, primarily to cities. But at this point in time, we're not aware of any dedicated grant monies coming from the state.
Okay, thanks.
All right. So is that consensus on capital hold on body cams, hold on operations? Then vaccination incentives.
Yeah.
My question's a little different. It's not more complimentary. It's what difference would that make?
I'm a no on
And
that.
is it fair?
We're in the stick era, not the carrot.
I
Yes.
agree. I don't
Yeah.
see the benefit of incentivizing vaccines at this point.
Okay.
I would be in favor of some smaller amount in this year that's more in the terms of spending some money to encourage people to get vaccinated, but not incentives. I just don't know that, paying people to get vaccinated doesn't seem like a real solid strategy. Making the case and outreaching to them to encourage them to get vaccinated, that's probably worthwhile in the short term, given where we're going. And so some money towards raising the percentage of people in the city that are vaccinated is worthwhile, but I think it's a communications problem, not a bribery problem.
And I think that's one where people with a lot more money than, or entities with a lot more money than we have are going to do a lot more than we could ever do. So we'll cross that one off. Eviction, defense and prevention. I actually have a suggestion on this one that isn't obvious from the materials we have. there's a pro bono defense that already exists to some extent that is well thought of by the court. These things are going to be ratcheted up. But what a couple of Superior Court judges have told me is that when they come in after they go through the mediation process, and like sometimes it's just a bit of money that holds up a deal. It takes it, gets them back, gets them to stay, gets a workout. So I would propose that we allocate this money, but condition its use on it has to be payments to a landlord in a settlement process. So when they come into court, the nonprofit group that tries to facilitate the deals needs money to make the deal happen. And so you're giving rental assistance at the point of eviction to force to dismiss the eviction instead of paying for defense, which is a delaying process. So defense delays doesn't keep it from being evicted. But when they get there at the mediation, what I think it was Gary Johnson and one of the commissioners telling me if they just have, throw $1,000 in, it makes the deal, so they are looking for money to do that too. But I don't know what other people think about injecting ourselves into the process at that point.
I don't know how this really plays out because I don't understand how this program would work. And I certainly am really in favor of doing things this and maybe more to help landlords who are reasonably trying to keep their tenants going, but the tenants got temporary reasons why they can't meet the rent. But I'd also tell you that the problem that's manifesting itself is I have been out talking to folks in the community, and I've run into at least 3 apartment complexes where most of the tenants that I talked to said they were moving. And they were moving a variety of places. And that's because the landlords have made 50 to 100% rent increases and have notified them that they're going to be effective, at the end of September, and that they see themselves being, particularly if they're on fixed incomes, being set up to be evicted because there isn't any way that they are able to absorb a $600 or a $900 rent increase on an apartment to be able to go and do that. And I've seen the same thing happen in at least one building that had 6 businesses in it, but a new owner, a commercial landlord, that essentially is using that as a strategy to empty the building. Okay, so what I would kind of think that this particular expenditure, as you described, Mr. Mayor, is probably helpful, but there is a bigger problem that maybe there is a solution that hasn't come to mind yet, or that is some of those agencies like the county and the state with deeper pockets than us are going to have to address.
Well, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with you. I don't agree with all of the provisos included, but the governor's latest pronouncement on this has a number of conditions that are on rental assistance from the state that are fairly onerous for the landlord. Can't raise the rent for 6 months. You can't charge certain late fees. You can't do this, you can't do that. So if you take the rental assistance money, you're going to be locked into certain conditions that mitigate the problems that you've talked about. But I agree. I've seen anecdotally the same thing, which in some cases, somebody hasn't paid their rent. The landlord feels that they could have paid their rent. They weren't making any effort. Okay, I'm going to raise your rent $800 because you're not going to pay me anyway. I want somebody else there. And the market will take care of what that real rent is. But there are going to be a lot of very sympathetic individual cases where people need help, and some very unsympathetic cases. It's going to be messy. That's why I was saying that for the amount we have, as opposed to delaying the process, kicking something in to keep the person in the unit where they are, it's kind of the last ditch effort to do that. But
There is, I'm trying to find, did Ms. Davenport make the proposal here on behalf of the sort of legal defense fund or something? I'm trying to find it, but I generally agree with.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I could jump in, it's at, it is within the documents, but what I've discovered is I neglected to include the actual description of what they would be doing. So if you don't mind, I'll share very quickly.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pages here to sort through.
Sure. So the way this has been presented to the city is that this is reflecting the fact that when right to counsel is certified in the county, the Housing Justice Project will not have the funding or staff to assist renters. They are actually not allowed to do that with the funds that they will have at that point. And so Lakewood is being asked to support whatever work they would be doing in Lakewood. And it's to represent Lakewood residents prior to cases being filed. So what you're looking at in terms of how the dollars would be spent is providing representation prior to eviction, matters being filed in court, legal services, and then additional resources. And again, this $225,000 is a one-year cost for the staff that would be needed for a staff attorney and a paralegal, and then assorted and sundry costs.
And this is through the Doma Pro Bono outfit?
Yes, yes.
So a couple of thoughts there. This is unfortunately part of my day job. I deal with a lot of landlord-tenant issues. And the governor's pronouncement and eviction moratorium also came with, I think it was HB 5160 or whatever the House bill was, that discussed changes to the residential landlord-tenant law, which does require this, the landlord has to provide a payment plan before they can really commence any eviction after September 30th. There has to be part of this dialogue. So to the extent there is a need to have some pro bono assistance, I would be supportive of the allocation. But I also agree with the mayor that it may be that we add some money or limit the assistance and still add some money to provide assistance with regard to making those payment plans actually work. Because otherwise, the folks who have been impacted by COVID are going to be further impacted by a large credit ding with their inability to pay, and the landlord's opportunity then to pursue those folks post September 30 for back rent. So there may be some value in doing what you're suggesting there if we can kind of carve it up.
Like you, I've had too much experience both as an attorney and as a landlord with tenants who didn't pay rent. This is a rather unique situation, but the issue is, how do you keep them there and make people whole, or as close to whole as it's acceptable, rather than let's hire some attorneys and we'll talk to them and tell them what their rights are. Well, maybe we can delay this for a couple of months, see if they can find another place to live. I mean, that's.
We give 100 toward the attorney assistance because they need to have some help, and maybe 100 toward the.
Yeah, this is also one I think we can wait and see where the county and state money are. There's going to be a lot more money for this than we're providing. That's why I was suggesting put it in the deal-making pot. I think there's going to be plenty of money for lawyers.
Yeah. Notwithstanding.
Now that I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Mr. Brandt
Mr.
said,
Clock
Spear.
is ticking.
is this organization, you know, the summary that you gave us about how it would like to help Lakewood renters. But are they like looking to replicate the same thing in Tacoma and University Place and that? Are they asking every jurisdiction for dollars to do this program on a grander scale? The request to us is just the amount they expect to spend on Lakewood renters. Or are they a small group that's focused on Lakewood?
No, Tacoma Pro Bono has been around for a long time. It's got members who participate throughout the county. But what's changed is this right to counsel idea, as Deputy Mayor was just mentioning, and what's going on specifically with COVID-19 representation is things are changing, the rules are changing, and unless some additional funding is provided to them for City of Lakewood representation, they're not going to be within our city anymore. They do provide services within Lakewood right now, but that will have to stop once right to counsel is certified. So I couldn't answer you 100% whether or not they are seeking funds from other jurisdictions. I don't know if other jurisdictions are engaged in a similar process that the council here has asked for with the community outreach. But Tacoma Pro Bono is a well-established group.
Okay, but essentially their position is they're only going to operate in the communities that fund them.
They're only going to operate where?
In communities that provide them funding.
They will operate where they're allowed to, and whether it's just within Pierce County or just within the city of Tacoma, I would have to verify under the new right to counsel rules. But as they explained, they will no longer be able to operate in Lakewood.
Right, thank you.
The Superior Court is a Pierce County court, and they are going to have a required mediation process. And the state's putting in a lot of money. So I'm so unsure on this. I would suggest we punt on it and see what shakes out with other funders, and then come back and see how we might be able to help. Not that I'm personally opposed to it. It's just, I don't know.
There is some exigency, so I would say we put it on the back burner, but not for too long, because September 30th is around the corner. And it truly is it's a snowball rolling down the hill on this one. There's a lot of pent up demand to get housing back on track after September 30th. I mean, I see it daily with the calls into my office on this stuff.
Yeah, I have a brother-in-law who has paperwork on 6 people who haven't paid for 18 months, sitting on the table. And they got all the money. So temporarily put that one on hold, move to Pierce County BIPOC Business Accelerator contribution.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we put a chunk of money in, would that money be solely for Lakewood cohorts, or how would that work? What's the return on investment for Lakewood?
That is certainly, Councilmember Wayland, a way that this could be broached with the county. They do intend to move the training for the cohorts into areas throughout the county, including Lakewood, and they hope to have local area experts be the trainers. So you would have, hopefully, whether it's instructors through community colleges or professionals working with each cohort, and the Lakewood cohort would include Lakewood trainers, hopefully. But yes, that is the intent.
Move.
Okay,
Yeah. Hope.
yeah.
Hope is up.
I'm generally not in favor of funding this. And this is one of those things that has its origin in national statistics about where there are very, very few there, and there are many, many places that have very, very small percentages of minority-owned businesses and of minority-owned businesses that are successful. And so it got recommended by Treasury in terms of things, of the kind of things that you could do and serve these communities. But I don't know if the local data says that. We got our report from Mrs. Newton, okay, and spoke, then there were something close to 30% of the businesses in Lakewood were owned by individuals of color or minorities, women being able to go through and do that. And the structure of this program is, you know, I would be more supportive if it was, we were funding an incubator to get new businesses started. But this is for existing businesses that just, I want to go and they'll get a rent stipend and they'll go to class. And the program, as it was outlined in the documents that I saw, didn't have any metrics that was going to gauge by it was successful, other than the people go to all the classes. And did they cash the checks that they were going to get for a rent subsidy if they passed went to all the classes. The groups that were listed as putting it in were all generally social services agencies, which are not necessarily the folks that you normally look at. They are people that could perhaps recruit people to go to class, but they're not the folks who that, with the exception of the Black Collective, which is filled with some very, very capable people across a great deal of disciplines to be able to go and do that. But I don't know that I see data that this is a critical problem in Lakewood, that individuals of color are blocked from being able to start businesses. I mean, we have 2 banks down in the Asian American community that are specifically focused on helping those businesses there. The Uni Bank and the Bank of Hope, they're both on the South Tacoma Way. And we seem to be doing well in terms of both retention of and the creation of businesses in our minority communities to be able to go and do that. So we don't have the same national problem that's the emphasis here. So I would certainly like to see some outcome metrics that this program is purporting to have, and some local data that would justify our participating.
Ms. Spear, can you fill us in on any more details?
Let me just bring up some information that was provided by Pierce County Economic Development Department to the County Council a few weeks ago. The intention is to serve entrepreneurs and business owners. It is intended for not only startups, but also growing businesses. So it's the idea of either getting something started flat out or letting it move to the next level. As Mr. Brandsetter mentioned, there would be rent stipend, but there's also coaching and mentorship for a year, grant resources, and other potential funding options. These are the areas that the curriculum would cover. And the idea is to have BIPOC experts speaking to the BIPOC audience. And that can help with language barriers. It can also help with just cultural barriers as well. So you see, the idea here is try to get a well-rounded cohort graduating by the end of the process. And then there is multicultural outreach done in order to help people apply, as well as for people to move ahead through the cohort. So to go back to some of his questions, I can certainly provide some additional data about whether Lakewood's demographics and its businesses are showing the need for this type of program overall. But also I'll reach out to the county and see if they have any outcome metrics already developed for the program and share that with the council.
So one question that Mr. Brandsetter had, I actually have some insight on with respect to working with Pierce County Economic Development. That is, who's going to be giving the class. Tacoma initially didn't want to participate in the cooperative endeavor. They then came back after it looked like it was going to be something that others were interested in and wanted to control it. They wanted to pick people out of nonprofits be the presenters, and Pierce County Economic Development folks were adamant, that, no, you're not going to do that. We're going to pick, we have people lined up who know what they're talking about, as opposed to sending you to a nonprofit for counseling. And so that's kind of work behind the scenes, but isn't obvious in the presentation. I can be more frank about it than they are. I think it's very important for us to do this.
Which one?
There are going to be a lot of restaurant restarts. We're not only the most diverse community in the county, we hold ourselves out as being business friendly. I think when we put those two together, this is something that we would be sending a very bad message if we didn't participate in. And on a personal, kind of anecdotal level, there's a residual from, for example, from generational wealth, from redlining that prevents people from, your grandparents and parents can't build the equity in a home that somebody else's could. My father-in-law, for example, came back from World War II as a white guy, bought a house, worked as a clerk at Safeway, was diligent, had some rentals, but built some equity. And if I wanted to start a restaurant, I go and say, hey, Roy, is there any way you can round up 25 grand? We need to buy some equipment. Other people go to their parents that couldn't get a loan or were redlined. They can't do that. They have the equal opportunity to open the restaurant, but they don't have the generational wealth to help do that. And part of this rectifies that. It's a small, relatively small amounts. As far as outcomes, the normal outcome measurement for new businesses is already alive at 1, 2, and 5 years. Because most of them fail.
And this would be allocated just hopefully for Lakewood
Yes.
opportunities?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the website right now. I showed it to Councilmember Farmer. It looks like the county issued the Accelerator application for deadline September 17th. So it looks like it's actually gestated well enough that it's legit and will hopefully serve the business community, the small business folks well. So I would be supportive of it.
I'm definitely supportive of it. And I think that you were correct, Mr. Mayor, that we would be remiss for our residents, for our community, if this is not a program that we did not participate in and take full advantage of. So I am in support.
And I'm aware of, from a variety of things I did as an attorney, that there's some cultural financing sources that the Korean community uses very well and has served our international district well with respect to startups that aren't available to other folks. So thumbs up on that one.
What's the next one here?
Yeah, what's the next one? My iPad keeps shutting down the content.
Yeah, the retention bonus. Yeah.
LPD retention bonus. We may be put in a position of doing this as a competitive thing, whether we want to address it now and ARPA is the issue.
I would be supportive in deferring this until we have the biennial adjustment opportunity to take a look at it. It may be of value, but we can certainly look at it there as part and parcel of the manager's discretion with the replacement funds. I don't think we have to have a category right now.
I totally agree with that, but I do think it is on trend. Everyone is starting to,
Is that right?
yeah, retentions and bonuses and incentives, relaxed different requirements, things like that. So I think it'll probably be something eventually.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Okay, so let's kick the can down the road on that one. ARPA program administration. It's going to cost us something to do this.
It's amazing.
Pardon?
Well, it's probably something we have to do, but again, it's a lot of money.
This is going to be this isn't going to be as easy as CARES Act. There are, think CDBG. I mean, they're somewhat onerous reporting requirements, some of which have, I think, already occurred.
What does it mean in the parenthetical, though, the ARPA coordinator in parentheses, including residential navigation services? What is that, Ms. Spear?
What I was trying to indicate there is at one point we'd said that there would need to be financial department staff for sure hired. And then the idea of having residential navigation services provided to Lakewood citizens. This is saying that the ARPA coordinator who would be working over the next 5+ years on this program would actually serve as the residential navigator for the city in this, instead of it being two different people. So we're trying to be a little more efficient and say the ARPA coordinator would be able to be the residential navigator as well.
I guess I'm not quite exactly sure what the residential navigator would be doing. Would that be administering or helping administer if we had funds for the Lakewood eviction defense portion of the monies, or what?
No, this is the idea that we are not duplicating services elsewhere. We are instead directing residents to either services or funds that they might be able to access through county, state, or federal sources.
Okay, got it.
This is kind of the hub of the wheel, right? So people call in saying, I need this, and this person is their point of contact.
That makes sense to me.
So it's navigation services for Lakewood residents.
Correct.
That helps.
Yeah, and that's a term that I think everyone is using, navigators. It's basically just the pointer.
Right.
So
but-
we know where to go and someone has like a point person to go
but
to.
it's- Yeah, instead of putting residential there, maybe navigation services or navigators for Lakewood residents or something along that line.
Sure.
All right. So,
Begs the question, where are we going to get these folks and how do we train them? But yeah, yeah.
so then we,
Great job.
maybe a little easier. Let's move to 132 and the identified revenue replacement expenditures. And I guess the first question is, do we want to do anything? Yes, Mr. City Manager.
Sorry, Mayor, before you move on from that table, I was wondering if you could just real quickly just run down the list and just recap the council direction or consensus there, just to make sure we have it.
Okay, for the initial expenditures, I'll try to do that. We move forward to on the Comfort Inn with the proviso that we want some contractual assurance that of adequate access used by Lakewood. Community Service Advisory Board increase $144,000 for the 1% fund. Warriors of Change, we've already committed, pay it out of this. Body cameras, pay the capital costs and wait on the operational costs. About approximate $900,000. Not move forward on the vaccination incentives. Defer in the short term on a decision on housing safety crisis response request till we know more about how it can be used. Move forward on the BIPOC Business Accelerator collaboration with Pierce County. Deferred on LPD retention bonus. And I think we're saying yes to this at this point to the administration costs. Anybody want to correct me? Then move to skip over 131 for the moment, go to 132, page 132, the identified revenue replacement expenditures. there was some indication council, more than one of you, I think, was interested in kicking this all down the road, this five-year project that we're embarking on.
I don't see any of those need to be done now.
Pardon?
I don't see any of those that need to be done right
There
away.
was one. The only one that I saw that I thought might have some time sensitivity was the multilingual website service redesign, because we're going to be directing people toward money, and communicating better is.
And I definitely think that, and then in conjunction, because we're trying to get information out, would be your reader boards. So it's another, because you can put multi-language things on reader boards. So if we're trying to get information out to people and up that, I would say that those two kind of go a little bit hand in hand.
Have you seen utility in Kent, for instance, on electronic reader boards?
Yeah, I was just trying to get the cost on the ones that we just did. So I said, sorry to bother you after hours, but so I'll find out tomorrow, but I use it and it's just basically for text, and I do multi-languages on it all the time. It's not really for photos, so I would encourage that we got something that was higher end, more LED, maybe a little bit more graphic friendly, but I do find them very useful.
Mr. Bulkey.
So my approach on this, on that list, the only one that I think I felt like I didn't understand and I don't think we needed was the city council chambers on the dais.
Agreed.
So, but the other ones, and you started with the website for multi-language, we've started with that. We'd already talked about that. And I just think we've already discussed the youth employment program. It's something that so I guess coming out of the gate, we want to commit ourselves. It's not, we're not saying we're going to spend this, but the city staff needs to plan. And so I was fine actually with everything on the list, I think, except for the city council chambers dais. And I didn't understand the South Sound Alliance future labor in the South Sound study. And I didn't understand the West Pierce one. So those would be the three that I wouldn't do on that list, I think. I think all the other ones. So website, hand washing facilities in city parks, which is lake planning, court chambers, IT, HR technology, the youth employment program, the reader boards, HVAC replacement, if that's something that actually will improve the health, the air quality. I'm fine with all those except for the three that I talked about, the labor study, which I don't know anything about, the dais and West Pierce in that case. I'm okay with the emergency services one, although I don't know anything about it.
Ms. Farmer.
Thank you. Let me speak. I had a question about the dais because early on in COVID, it was all about barriers, and then we started talking about really embracing the hybrid environment. And I thought we had moved to outfitting the council chambers for a hybrid environment. Like, we are squashed together. This is actually very uncomfortable for me to be sitting so close to you guys, but we have to do it because I don't think that board goes very far or whatever. And so we clearly have challenges with a hybrid environment. And so I wanted to ask the question, did I miss something about that? Maybe not. Okay, moving on. The other question I have, and Patty, I'm giving you the eyeball over here, are there general fund monies put aside to do the rest of the redesign? Because $35,000 is, are you kidding me? That's budget dust. That won't even touch your homepage.
Is that just talking
That's
about the
insane.
translation part? Was my guess. It wasn't about a full redesign because, yeah, 3,500 will not cut it.
It won't.
I'm in the
even
middle
come
of one right
close.
now.
You
And,
need a
yeah.
couple $100,000. Yeah.
At least 3.
Oh my gosh. I'm spending 700,000 for phase one of my state agencies. So yeah, if you want to communicate, it's your digital service delivery platform. Anyway, so I have a question about that.
And
Okay.
Council, I'm sorry.
Go back, Ms. Spear?
Thank you. Yes, the $35,000 is really concentrated for allowing multilingual services available through the city's website. West Pierce Fire and Rescue, Councilmember Boki, is explained at page 144, what they're asking for with those funds. And then the South Sound Alliance is at, excuse me, page 147, if the council wanted to look at either of those.
And my last question, I'm sorry, Councilmember Branstetter. I'm curious, West Pierce Fire and Rescue, so it appears that they asked us for replacement dollars. The library did not ask us for replacement dollars. If we're going to give to one organization, might we need to consider others? Only because they asked. I'm not sure how that happened.
I don't know. I don't know how they would incur a loss because they're all property tax revenue.
Okay.
So it's fixed. They might have, there really weren't delinquencies either to speak of because the mortgage companies kept up the payments.
Thank you.
It looks like they want ham radios. And yeah.
It's also providing emergency messaging in multiple languages.
Okay, Mr. Brett. Reverse 911, I guess. Mr. Branstetter.
Well, first of all, I think we value our relationship with West Pierce and emergency, and this benefits not only the city and University Place, but also Stellicum and in that there over there. In reading this, the thing that was interesting to me is that it said the city of Lakewood has a great setup with ham radios, and I wasn't aware of that. That they're looking to replicate to be able to go through and do this. But their request is two separate, distinct requests. And the emergency operations, the emergency management request is one that I think I would definitely support. I'm just not quite sure I understand the ham radio piece, both what Lakewood is currently doing with it and what the fire department would want to do with it.
Maybe Ms. Boki could tell us from listening to former council member Roach. The issue I have with ham radios is that there's new technology funded by the federal government, and it's for replacing cells on a short-term basis and having emergency access to it. They're doing it by bringing trucks in and with drones so that emergency services has access. I actually have a card from the city and a card from the county where I can get overrides. And then if that goes down, there's supposed to be a limited period of time when the AT&T, I think it's AT&T. I sat next to the guy at a meeting, comes in and reestablishes an emergency network, either from the air or from trucks. So, and there's on the EMS side now with the radio system in Pierce County, there's the 800 band and there's the old band. So there's, and an analog or redundancy. So I don't see where ham radios is.
Yeah. But, you
way of
know,
the
on the
future.
rest of the list, it's the making the changes to the dais to do social distancing. I guess I'm more of an optimist that that's something that needs to happen more short term. When social distancing was really critical, we just didn't even come here to be able to go and do that. So I don't know that a permanent redesigning the dais is a necessary long-term future cost to be able to go and do that, unless this is designed to do something temporary. But trying to envision what that would even look like to get us 6 feet apart and 2 feet apart.
Like it built.
So,
In other venues, they've used partitions.
so,
Yeah. And I wouldn't.
Because if you lose circulation.
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to be in.
I'd just go back home.
Plexiglass. people.
I would just call in that if we're gonna do partitions. So when it says 4 stations, are those 4 stations in Lakewood that we're being asked to pay for? On West Pierce, they said there's 4 stations that they want to upgrade on the, I guess we're being asked to upgrade cameras and audio capabilities. Whatever it is.
Are there 4 stations in Lakewood? Well, there are.
Is it the 4 Lakewood stations? I mean, I don't think we should pay for outside of Lakewood.
So we got,
We've got 5, right?
yeah, I can think of 4, so.
We have 6 stations in Lakewood.
This is referring, Mr. Mayor, to the Department Operations Center and then 4 backup locations.
Oh, okay.
Can I ask a question?
The other
Mr.
2
Wade?
things I think that's up to them. It's small beer and they should do it. But if the council wants to do the 200, I mean, it's as long as it's in Lakewood.
And I have a follow-up question on this, Tiffany, if I could. The next page, 145, is Assistant Chief Unfred's comment to you about monies for the reverse 911 system. Would that be part and parcel to what West Pierce is asking for, or is that something in addition to?
It's separate and apart. I had the same question, Deputy Mayor, and verified that these are 2 different requests, and they are.
I think I'm all supportive of whatever it takes to upgrade our emergency management system, including different languages, but the reverse 911 thing, if Lakewood had it, that would be great, because I know the county does some of that work, as long as it's not duplicative. It seems like doing what we need to do to enhance our emergency management capabilities would be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have a bit of a different approach on the West Pierce fire. I don't have, except I join Mr. Bulkey with respect to not being enthralled with the city council chambers expansion. And generally agree with these. In my mind, it's a timing issue. With respect to West Pierce Fire, they're, as a junior taxing district, they are not eligible for direct funding. We're the lowest level of government that receives direct funding, an entitlement as an entitlement city. In most jurisdictions, they would be part of the city. They do a good job. They don't have a funding source other than their property tax revenue. Tacoma Fire gets political favors in large sums of money for general operations. And here they've articulated improvements that they want to make. Although I'm not, as indicated, not a fan of shortwave radios. I leave it to their discretion. That's how they spend the money. And I just give them the $250,000.
I actually think that the ham radios are, because they're such the basic level of communication, that they're the most important form of communication to have and to have upgraded. So I do think that there is a significant amount of importance in the ham radios.
Yep. I agree.
Channeling Pam Roach.
They're actually very useful, and there's a dedicated following, and yeah.
It's what I've learned. I mean, it's what you've heard too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it
absolutely.
is in case everything goes
If
out,
everything goes down, those
there's a
suckers
solar
are
flare,
operating.
Whatever it
So,
may be, you need the ham radio.
yeah,
And the CBs.
they're useful. Yeah, I'm in support.
Yeah, so
230 plus whatever it needs to be for the. Be the 230 plus whatever we need for Chief Unfred's reverse 911 allocation. I'm losing my track on the chart.
that was right above it. Emergency services alert and warning system. 132
Okay,
of,
it's the scrolling back and forth that's getting to me here. There we go. Got it. Yep.
so we
Sorry
do
about
those
that.
two. And the
There it is.
translation. Not refer to that as website redesign.
Right.
And hold on the rest,
Well, we're gonna do the reader boards, right?
all the reader boards.
And didn't we want to look at the youth employment program for planning purposes for staff? It's something we talked about for summer.
Paul, where's the county council on youth employment? You know, no, that's what my only concern there is not whether it's a good idea or not. It's whether there's money coming from
Right.
from the state or county. And I can't tell you right now. I know that county parks is doing some stuff, but I don't know what the duration of that is.
My thinking on these things is you either commit to it or you don't. If we're gonna take it off the table tonight, my thing is the money's available for something else. That's how I would approach it. So, and I think the mayor's correct. I don't know what the county is gonna do. And then the question is it something that we can do at the city level for that much money? And I don't know.
I think that there is some segregating to do. What do we go ahead with immediately and what do we do after August of 2022 when the second block of the dollars comes in, so that we just don't take all of the city revenue replacement out of the first chunk. If we want to defer any item on this list until after August of next year, when funding will be here. I don't know where I would draw those lines, other than maybe the space reorganization could wait until 2022. I think, and maybe the reader boards.
Here, and excuse me, because I'm now talked 3 or 4 times. I actually, when I went through this, I didn't have this coming out of revenue replacement. The only thing that I had coming out of revenue replacement was the body cameras. So we had almost $2.9 million left that we would hold, with the idea being that that's where the money is going to come from going forward if we're going to get serious about doing some stuff in those census tracts. Really determining some ARPA eligibility, because I think within the qualified census tracts, we're going to find that there's some things that we can't do now that we're going to be able to do in those qualified census tracts after the final Treasury guidance and these things move on. So that's where I had that. I actually had this because I didn't think it was a lot of money, because the $2 million, because later on, there's some things that I've yanked out completely. And I just had this coming out of outside of the revenue replacement, actually.
So what's your suggestion on this?
Well, it sounds like the will of the council is that you don't want to, no one wants that $10,000, but beyond that, we're kind of up in the air on things. So I guess we could wait. I guess it sounds like we want to do reader boards. We don't want to do the city council chambers. I'm not sure what else we don't want to do there, so.
Okay.
I would just agree on the 3 or 4 items that we've already agreed to and then hold the rest.
And hold the rest. So the 3 or 4 items we agree to are emergency services alert, West Coast Fire, website translation, and read boards. There's 4. And move forward on those now and hold on the rest. This is like a 4-year project. So. Yeah. Yeah, I would go for 1 year of the youth employment program and see where other people are. We can always redirect it. Yeah. And when you plan in advance and be able to hire a coordinator.
That we're giving people time to plan it.
Right.
Yes.
And just to clarify, at one point, there was some sort of consensus on the HVAC cooler system, but I didn't hear that. Is that a holdback or is that a move forward? Just to give clarity to the manager here.
I find out it's probably gonna take a year for that to show up, given the supply chain.
We're all looking at you.
Okay, so we'll put it on the back burner.
Put it
then.
on the back burner. Don't know what
We'll get the reader boards first, and we can tell
come back
people
and
about it.
see what the incremental benefit of a bipolar ionization. It sounds like something that needs lithium. Yeah. All right. So I think that would take a dehumidifier. Let's see. Then we'll go to community engagement.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if I could just clarify once quickly here. These are all ideas, and the way this was explained to everyone who submitted them through the community engagement process is that there were absolutely no commitments, and there was varying level of detail provided on all of these projects from the proponents. Some of these may not even qualify under ARPA criteria that we're going to see come out for how projects have to be defined and tracked. So we may not even see all of these come forward in part of the formal application process. But other than that, leave it to you.
Yeah. And I think this is one option which would cut down the length of the meeting tonight substantially, is to say this needs this needs to wait for the guidance and a formal application process where people submit a budget and a specific proposal for spending the funds. Mr. Polkey.
So I think 2 of them that I really feel because they fit into the qualified census tracts, which I think we're going to hear a lot more about, and we're just going to have to come to grips that, but we have them in Lakewood. Some other parts of the county don't have the qualified census tracts, so it's going to make things more difficult for them. Is is the Habitat for Humanity project and the Rebuilding Together South Sound. And I think if both those are inside the census tracts, we're probably gold. And those are 2 things that I would support going forward. But I certainly support the idea that the mayor just threw out that we have to have some kind of formalized process, I think, where everybody, because there'll be other folks that come out if we have a formal process, right? That's what you're getting to.
Yes, and to your point, yeah, those 2 projects actually go to things we've been discussing independent of ARPA, which are affordable housing, development in disadvantaged areas, the affordable housing component. We know the details of the Habitat for Humanity Boat Street project from the permitting process and other requests for funds. And for full disclosure, Habitat Tillicum has always been a pet project for me. So, Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, the two projects on this list, and there might be some others, but the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA, those don't seem to fit what we agreed to as the goals of not of one-time expenses or perhaps some pilot projects. These are just ongoing to continue to do the same kind of services that they have been doing. There isn't a 5-year window that's where there's some unique new project or something that's ARPA based. And while we've talked a lot recently about having programs for youth in the city to do that, it's not an ARPA thing, and it doesn't fit the guidelines we agreed to at the beginning of that we wanted to consider these things one-time money, or with the exception of some pilot type programs just to see to do. So I would not be considering those as ARPA, and they may be some of the things that don't necessarily fit when we get all the guidance anyway, but those are the sorts of things that people apply to the Community Services Advisory Board or work through that we fund every year, where we fund programs for folks that want to do youth programs. And this is more of an end run around that process. But we asked, and so that's what they said, but I don't think it's our own criteria to do that. The one item that isn't on the list, and maybe there are two, but was we got the request that was submitted by about 14 business owners asking us to do something about homelessness, and they suggested having a mobile contact team that was not just focused on mental health, but was focused on just contacting street homeless and dealing with them and providing some things. And while that could augment, I think that's a proposal that they weren't asking for the money for themselves. They were asking us to do it. And I think that's a proposal that is worth keeping on the table to flush out. So it's okay, but what kind of a vehicle would it be? Who would we partner with to have it staffed and provided? But it's something that would really be visible.
Yes.
In Lakewood. It would be focused on Lakewood. It wouldn't be an occasional county program that occasionally comes into town to do that. It would do that so it would be both visible to the folks that we have that are experiencing homeless as somebody's friendly coming down the road, and it would be visible to other residents that there is someone who is out there assisting, and by and large, we're a pretty compassionate community, and people in Lakewood want to see us doing something to help people that they feel need help. So I'd sort of like to get that, but there's the proposal didn't come to us with a dollar sign, because the people weren't asking to do it themselves. They were asking us to do it. And just handing us the idea. So
I like it. So currently, I see the contracts, hopefully that they'll adopt some metrics. But millions of dollars are passing through the county for homelessness, behavioral health, and housing, both from ARPA funds and other sources, tens of millions of dollars. And a significant portion of that is being directed to nonprofits whose programs include outreach. As you suggest, they have various descriptions of what they're doing. It's hard to pin them down on metrics, measurements for how much of the service they're providing or how you're going to tell whether they're successful or not. That's an ongoing difficulty in the human services industry. But we're going to have, I think in the next year, if there is success in that regard, we're going to have a model for it. And we're going to have a service provider in Pierce, within Pierce County, a service provider or 2 or 3 that are doing that, government funded, nonprofit provided. And so reserving something for that and looking at it after we've seen who's had success, it's probably a really good idea. I hate to try to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
or
although I
start
do,
a county department or a city department.
I do think though that we also don't want to necessarily buy into somebody else's metrics. We should look at what are the metrics we want.
Tell me and I'll try to get them to put it in the county contract. Literally, it's pulling teeth.
Well,
It's
I
worse
think-
than pulling teeth.
I think we should have a placeholder for this concept because homelessness and addressing homelessness in the city of Lakewood is something we hear frequently from folks in Lakewood, especially those in the central business district, about what are we doing to address homelessness? And so I think having the motel acquisition, this might even provide, on a very base level, transportation to take folks to the facility and provide some outreach services. So I agree that we don't have it in stone in terms of identified parameters or metrics, but I think we should have a placeholder for something that provides outreach services that works with our contact teams through the police department, as well as the other providers in Lakewood that do the services. Right. Maybe we could have a reader board on the side of it, Patty.
So with respect to the Boys and Girls Club and YMCA, I wouldn't exclude those categorically, but I'd want, in the application process, I'd want to see a linkage to the pandemic. There's a tremendous behavioral health problem with youth being cooped up for 2 years, lack of socialization, and the mental health referrals have gone way up. And so that integration programs, activities, socialization may be able to be linked to a program specific to addressing those needs, as opposed to we're going to come play basketball. See what they come up with, but I try to guide them in that direction to be more competitive.
So I have a question on and it's just because I don't know about the Springbrook Connections Community Building purchase. That sounds, I don't know, like, it doesn't sound very fleshed out. I mean, the location, it talks about like a possible, that's one of the areas that people have talked about a lot, about having something for people, speaking of recreation. So I was wondering if you guys had any insight on that.
Only that it has no former structure. It's an idea.
Okay.
About 40, 50 years ago, there was a CDBG funded effort by the federal government to do with community centers what Andrew Carnegie did with libraries.
Okay.
You think of that model. Here, we'll give you a building for your community and you do good stuff with it. Here's the general purpose. That's how Telecom came about. That building is owned by a nonprofit who's had all sorts of problems, but so much so that Pierce County wouldn't take it back on the reverter. And there is not a sustained funding source for any of these. So it's not a one-time, whether you're the funder or not, it's not a one-time expense when you set one up. It's something that lasts as long as the building. And so I don't know that there's, they probably are asking the county and the state for money too, or if, I don't know that there's an entity. There's certainly not one with a track record. There's not an administrator, there's not a program.
Kind of wonder if there could be a leverage partnership with the county funds and maybe like we're doing at the motel. And it would be interesting if they're discussing the target market here being both Springbrook and the neighboring communities of Tillicum and Woodbrook, whether the other 501c3, if it still exists, that has the Tillicum Community Center would consider selling the darn thing and putting the funds into one facility that serves all the communities.
But Tillicum and Woodbrook aren't gonna go to Springbrook. These are people who aren't particularly mobile. They're walking on our new sidewalks to go buy groceries. I mean, it's,
I just think it sounds like something worth exploring. And so that's why I just wanted to bring it up. It's in the location that we've talked about a lot. And it also could possibly fill a lot of the voids that have also been brought up. So I would just like to see it kept up there and explored and maybe get a little bit more information on.
it'll also be interesting to see what the building actually presents as opportunities.
Yeah, I've been in the building quite a few times, and if a group was a successor owner to Center Force, and was really capable of managing programs and doing it, and of perhaps renting out space so that they could operate it without a continued city or subsidy. That's one thing. I think the building is available to make arrangements to go and look at it so that you have some idea about what you're talking about. The concern is that it doesn't become like the community center in Tillicum that has struggled, and while it's relied heavily on some volunteers and a lot of personal folks' money in there, and now it's kind of sustained by the CMAR folks that have become the primary occupant, and most of it is a health clinic. But I haven't seen the business plan that goes with this. And I think that we could come back to considering it if in fact the state and the county and the Department of Health are really looking at putting some money into it. It is a less expensive way than trying to go through and building something, and it goes on off. So but it's not something that I think we can say right now that we're going to go ahead with and do that. Let the Springbrook Connections people build that coalition and see who's all there other than us. I think that but on a related note, I think that I would like to think that we might want to put some number of dollars, maybe $400,000 as a placeholder towards implementation of the revised Tillicum neighborhood plan over the next year, where we're supposed to provide an update to that 10-year plan, and it needs updates because there are things that were done and things that were now no longer even apply. But if we're going to do the planning of the future for Tillicum, and it's one of the designated central tracks, having some money set aside to start the implementation of the new plan would be a good springboard to avoid having a plan that then sits on a shelf.
Yeah, and that I think would need to wait for guidance to as to whether it would, just because it's in the second track, where they'd be eligible for just planning. Mr. Whalen.
I think I heard you mention something about the Y and the Boys and Girls Clubs and whether we have landed on just a placeholder for that or not. But
No,
I would just agree with you to the extent that we could focus on teen engagement and mental health support in either the Y and or the Boys and Girls Clubs, as opposed to the other activities for seniors and everything else. I think we've heard so much about the lack of programming for youth and youth activities in the city. That would be, I think, a good thing to look at.
Yeah, my only concern is that it's not just to be competitive in a process. It's not just be, we're going to do some more of what we always do. This is supplementing our normal operational funds. It's, here's how we're going to address a problem. And
Or
if they
enhance
come up with,
opportunity. Yeah.
they know about more about what they do than I do. And if they come up with something that's convincing about
Sure.
addressing the pandemic related problem, I'd be all for it. But so in going through, yeah, Ms. Farmer.
Before we get too far away from this list, I did want to mention that I've had some conversation with Habitat for Humanity, and I fully support the Boat Street project. But there's a lot of money floating around for infrastructure, sewers and that sort of thing. So it's likely that our allocation for that will go down. So we might not need the full 242. Yep.
I know there'll probably be an applicant for a sewer under a county program. Mr. Wilkie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So a segue into that, and I'll just say, this is probably the rest of my list too. They're very well, I'm anticipating that the county council is going to come up with a sewer extension program. And they'll actually put the program in through ordinance, and then we'll fund it out of Arpa, probably in the biennial budget. So but it will ask for a local match, right? Or the match really is going to come from the county. It's going to take local effort. But in this case, I don't think we're going to have to use our ARPA dollars. I would urge us to figure out what we can do in Tillicum over the next 4 years, and figure out how much we can spend out of those sewer or whatever funds we've got. And that would be our match, I think. And then we could be eligible for the county dollars. The reason I bring it up though is the county is going to commit that money probably as much as they're going to commit in the budget in November. And after that, I think most of the other money will be spoken for. So I don't know that we'll get another crack at the apple. So if we need, a couple $1 million over the next 4 years, then we need to at least tell them, this is what we're anticipating, and this is our need, or this is our ask. Otherwise, it's all going to end in University Place. So. Because they are, to their credit, they're in laser-like focus on getting their areas sewered. And I have not been in a meeting yet where they haven't said right out of the gate, I mean, the check had barely arrived and they were like, we want to sewer this area. We are going to commit our ARPA dollars behind it. And so they've been very direct in how they're going to do it. They don't have to have the long conversations that we're having about all these other different things.
They didn't come up with the match 20 years ago and should regret what they did. Right. But yeah, you're right, and I think Mr. Bolke and I have seen different versions of the budget, but I think it's a foregone conclusion there will be sewer money in there. It's just what the exact conditions are, whether it's a 50% match or a 30% match, or how much goes to what type of sewer. So, but there will be. And my stupid iPad. There's a way somebody with a little technical prowess could fix this problem for me and change my settings, but it'd be easier to buy a new iPad. So, so we'll wait for applications for the most of this. I think I heard some interest in moving forward with Habitat. That's an ongoing project right now. It's the council's wish on that. Okay, so we'll Habitat, because that's more than an idea. And I think, what else falls in that same category.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, what I heard was rebuilding together South Sound as well.
Yeah, can you update us on the details of that, or was that just enhancing the present volume of?
They are targeting their efforts within the qualified census tracts. And if you go to page 167 of your packet, you'll see the communication from them about their project. It would be a 5-year program to set up the Rebuilding a Healthy Neighborhood program in each of the qualified census tracts that would last for 1 to 2 years. So if you look at the second paragraph on page 167, it's explaining that they've been doing Rebuilding Day and Safe at Home programs with Lakewood for the last few years. And the idea is to expand those programs with additional funding. And then the Rebuilding a Healthy Neighborhood program would be new within those qualified census tracts, and the estimated cost per neighborhood per year is $65,000.
This, my personal experience with this organization is it's probably from Lakewood's meager contribution standpoint, one of the best leveraged human services allocations that we've made. They get a lot of volunteer labor. They get contributions from other sources, and they put that together with this smaller local contribution and save, in many cases, preserve housing for low-income, disabled, and elderly individuals. So,
And they're proposing new projects, they're just not asking everyone to continue doing what they were doing, but they're looking at new projects in new areas, a specific amount of time in each of the targeted census tracts. So, it isn't just ongoing operating request, and their request here has got a bit more detail than the YMCA's or the Boys and Girls Club.
Is this the program that helps senior citizens and disabled do repairs in their homes, or no?
yeah, they'll do, bathroom with a rotten floor, a roof, ADA accessibility, decks, come in with tradespeople who are competent in what they do. It isn't so, they're volunteers, but it's a little different than Habitat. It might be a construction company. Yeah.
It'd be nice to get a sense that if it's working pretty well, and making sure that we got a good handle on the program before we throw money at it.
Well, we have routinely, maybe not every year, but we've routinely given them a 1% allocation.
Mhm.
And they've done, when they report back, if you give them $25,000, $30,000, they may have done $200,000 worth of work in the city of Lakewood. So I'd be in favor of going forward with them because it is more well-defined, and it hits that housing and low income.
Okay.
I think it's all together.
They don't take loans out against homes at all for equity to repay. This is a grant. program?
Not that I'm aware of. This is, they just fix it.
Okay.
These are more. These are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these are more, I think, $25,000 jobs.
Got it.
That
The
kind
the
of-
only reason why I ask is I got this interesting, I won't share it, but complaint from some woman today who felt she's being taken advantage of on a program managed by the city of Lakewood, where there's some sort of senior housing work being performed by a contractor that's taking advantage of her, and she's up against it apparently. So I didn't know. It's just anecdotal experience from one person, but it's probably something we need to be aware of.
On what?
I'll share it with
What
you.
program?
She says, I'm involved in a program that helps senior citizens and disabled do repairs on their home that they normally wouldn't be able to afford. I started out with a bid of 34 grand. The total is now well over 47 grand. This is a loan against the equity in my home. It's a government program managed by the city of Lakewood. I feel they're really taking advantage of me, and I'm down to the last draw for the contractor. I'm not going to be able to sign off, and I'm being robbed by the way it's managed.
That's home funding.
So there's something going on.
It sounds like home funding, but yeah.
Okay.
All right. So. Lost my page again. Get back. 130.
Page 131, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling back. There we are. So to recap. Yeah. On community engagement, external requests, we were, as a general proposition, we look for detailed applications as projects and budget. We are moving forward with, I'm getting cross-eyed, Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together South Sound. Basically looking for more information on others. Oh, is this a separate West Pierce Fire and Rescue? Yes, so it's the same money.
It's the same money, Mr. Mayor. I apologize. It got very confusing in terms of where to allocate funds from versus where and how it was requested. But yes, those are the same things that you've already discussed.
It's confusing for us and it's listed in orderly fashion. You got it shook up in a shoebox. So thank you. Anything else there that we've missed?
We haven't discussed the infrastructure piece on the Lakewood Water District well much. Is that something we want to just defer, or?
Yeah,
That might be a census tract investment that,
I think that AWC is urging the state to designate ARPA dollars, particularly for water
Oh,
and
good.
type projects. And so in the next legislative session, there may be an allocation of money that can be applied for that would accomplish this, and we should wait.
yeah, my initial reaction on that is along the lines of Mr. Branstadter's. I'd probably kick it down the road 2 years. The state's going to have a lot of money. And when they start looking at all the restrictions going back to the water and sewer infrastructure, clear, safe harbors is probably going to be a good way to channel some money on.
And then the other thing we didn't discuss is I'm not really enthusiastic about the library's request to money to put in lockers, which I gather is if you reserve a book, they'll put the book in a locker and tell you what your locker number is, or to go and get
I
it or
thought that was-
something. It,
Right now, I think they put them in a paper bag. Yeah. And you just pick them up. So there needs to be probably.
I can recycle the paper bags. They're really nice. They have handles on them. They're. But I don't know that I see.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Ms. Farmer?
Yeah, they can certainly provide us with some more information. And I did have a chat with some of my library folks recently, and it's really a wave of how libraries are distributing books these days is the contactless. It's less people power and it's less contact with the public. And so if you know what you want, they just get it ready for you. You can pick it up at any time. It's like the Amazon lockers where you can pick up your stuff on your time. So it doesn't impact open hours and that sort of thing. So. I actually don't know that answer to that question, but yeah, it's becoming a thing. It's not just a Lakewood thing. It's a library system thing around the nation.
All right. So anything else that shouldn't be on hold? So I think we've worked our way through.
As I deferred to the deputy mayor about the Lakewood Gardens item as to whether that's something that should move forward early or can be on hold.
I wait till before we spend any more time on it, I'd wait till the guidance came out, because that's probably the one that's the least likely to be eligible.
Right. Yeah, it might be NELTAC qualified.
So there may be a funding source, but not this one.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Spear, for adding some
Excellent.
order to this chaos.
Excellent help. Thank you.
Thank you. And so next Monday night, as it stands, we'll be bringing you updated versions of how dollars might be allocated and spended initially and then within the next couple of years per your discussion tonight. But you're scheduled to take action if you're ready to or continue as needed. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Branstetter.
So I just wanted to go back to that first chart in Appendix B. Are we going to reduce those dollars in each of those categories and then have another line that has essentially ARPA dollars still being in reserve that aren't obligated to one of the other 7? So that we don't put the dollars in each of those categories where we don't have something that we're moving forward with. Are we going to have that bigger block of money that's held? I mean, it's just a question of how we're going to describe it in the ordinance. But it seems to me it's better to say we've got X amount of dollars we haven't decided yet than to actually put it into one of those 7 groups and have an undecided line H, I guess is what it would be on that.
I think since we're in the fill-in mode, as opposed to being federal or state or even county government, it's more an inventory of where we spent the money than a plan for where we're going to spend the money. Because right now we don't know where the holes are. So in that vein, I think your suggestion's a good one. We put down the things that we've agreed on in the categories they go in, and the rest is to be determined.
Yeah, so have a to determined line or just have it not add up to everything. Either way.
Yeah, so as long as we're under the threshold of $13,766,000. All right. Reports by the city manager. Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Just one update, just a friendly reminder that city's 25th anniversary celebration will be this Saturday over on Motor Ave, the Colonial Plaza, from 2 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. There'll be a wide variety of events and activities and some food trucks and stuff like that. Also, just as a friendly reminder, the commemoration and recognition of our 25th year of incorporation will occur at 5 p.m. So if we could have this body there about 4:45 or so that we can kick that off.
It's
And,
4:45 showtime.
The event will go on no matter what the weather is. And I know somebody was telling me today that there's 80% chance of rain on Saturday. But I also pointed out that this time last week, there was 100% chance of rain today. And today was a beautiful day. So I know Saturday is going to be a beautiful day as well. So with that, that's my report.
You're going to rain in our parade.
Where's my? Is that it? All right.
I know it's shocking, but that was it.
That was. I thought it was a pregnant pause. All right.
I can start talking if you want.
What happened to the Mr. Caulfield we know about?
I don't know, geez.
Throw out a subject matter. I'll start talking.
That's not a mask, it's a gag. Mr. Bulkey. Council comments. Ms. Branstad.
The only thing is that I know that we're supposed to appoint a representative and alternate to the South Sound Housing Affordabilities Executive Board next time. And I would just want to say that I don't want either one of those jobs.
You just used my line. Ms. Farmer.
I'm not opposed to the appointment to the SHAPE board, but I would need to trade PSRC so we can do a little horse trading. Tonight I gave the city update to the school board, and also the board, I just got word that the board passed its equity and inclusion policy 4-1.
4-1. Shocking.
Thursday I attended the Western State Hospital virtual open house, and I was impressed by the large number of comments and the intelligence and the depth of the questions. It seemed like a pretty good questioning system, except that they couldn't exactly have any back and forth. So it was just question, answer, and then no parlay. So it's like, interesting. That meeting was followed closely by the Lake City Neighborhood Association, my first foray into that group. Oh my gosh, they're hilarious. They're awesome. And I think Mike is an honorary member. That was great fun. They're very appreciative of the environment there. So I heard all about trees. We talked about trees, and they were very appreciative of the fact that we have a study session on the 27th about trees, and I hope that they will be watching or attending. They're also very attuned, of course, to the water and the cleanliness of the water. The milfoil has not made an appearance, and so the water's very clean. A lot of the residents are divers, and so it's very good. And they're also interested in possibly figuring out a way to keep the boats, some of the boats that put in on one of the 5 boat ramps that we have around the lake, keep them washed or certified from invasive species, and not entirely sure logistically how you make that happen when apparently we only own one of the boat ramps, but they're very interested in that. And that is all I have.
Isabel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have anything to report, just that I am looking forward to the event on Saturday. I think that that will be a lot of fun, rain or shine.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. I enjoyed the 9/11 Memorial Celebration. I shouldn't say celebration. The event on Friday. Well done, as always. Looking forward to the city event coming up this Saturday, but in between, we got a bunch of stuff going on. I signed up for this seminar called The Future of the Burbs, and it is a discussion of emerging mixed-use development trends, industrial development trends, and transit-oriented development best practices. So I'm taking a little bit of time out of my workday to attend that, and I'll report back if there's something interesting. We do have PCRC, Pierce County Regional Council, on Thursday, so I will be attending that, which will be, I'm sure, loads of fun. And then on Friday, I thought I had something else, but perhaps not. That should be plenty. And I'll see you all on Saturday. Take care.
And I'll just back up to Friday, where before our, again, presented program for a 9/11 commemoration. I spent the morning at the SSMCP Steering Committee retreat, developing and approving most of the legislative and policy initiatives for the coming year. And tomorrow morning at 7:30, Coffee with the Mayor will feature Ms. Newton. So, and it will be hybrid. I will be sitting here, but you can attend virtually.
With coffee.
No, St. Clair's is not open for the meetings. So we came back here the last two meetings. This will be open here for individual participation in person, or you can be online. So, anything further? No executive session, right? We're adjourned.